This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Jeff Whitworth, K-State crop entomologist, starts the show as he explains if there are any seed varieties that are best for Dectes Stem Borer protection. Continuing the show is part of the keynote presentation from K-State Swine Day by Arkin Wu. He discusses the swine industry in China and how it has evolved in the past years. Kansas State University instructor and horticulture extension specialist Cynthia Domenghini ends today's show sharing how to care for holiday plants, including Christmas cactus, poinsettia, and amaryllis. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show talking with K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, anytime.
Jeff, I feel like as we're entering winter and the colder months, we'll be done talking about pests and crops. However, you've been getting a few questions.
That's true. That brings up a quick point. I have gotten a few calls about insects when we get a cold spell and then it warms up for a day or two or a week like we normally do every year. Those insects that overwinter as adults often become active. So if they're in the house or in a barn or in some kind of a structure where it's protected, it warms up, they warm up, and they'll move around a little bit. And they become a little more visible, sometimes to the point where they're kind of a nuisance, but they're not going to affect anything. They're not going to infest anything. They're not going to do anything other than go back to hibernating as soon as it gets cold. The warmth just causes them to move around a little bit, and stretch their legs, stretch their wings, that kind of stuff. So just a quick point there. Now, what I have been getting quite a few calls about is the Dectes soybean stem borer. If it's in soybeans, it's called the soybean stem borer. If it's in sunflowers, those are the two crops that they infest in Kansas, it's called the sunflower stem borer. It's the same insect. Sometimes it's confused with blister beetles because they're about the same size. They have long antennae, and lots of times you can find many of them in one place, just like you do blister beetles, but they have a totally different biology. The Dectes stem borer, what I've been getting calls about, apparently, the first time I know about that we found Dectes stem borers in soybeans was about 1985 or the mid-'80s. They're native to Kansas, but they're normally in sunflowers, native sunflowers, and they moved over and now infest planted sunflowers also, or to domesticate from sunflowers. But in 85, we started finding them in soybeans. And now, in the last few years, we find them mostly in soybeans, very few in sunflowers. Matter of fact, we can't find them in the native sunflowers anymore. But apparently, since 85, we found them in first of all, we found them in the south central part of the state and in the western, about one half of the state. And that's it, from about 77 Highway, which runs through Junction City, north and south there, west, soybean stem borers. East, nothing. But we even did a survey probably 10 or 15 years ago, and we didn't find hardly any at all in the eastern part of the state. But recently, I've been getting calls from the southeastern part of Kansas that apparently the Dectes is moving that direction. I say moving that direction. You know what? They're found in the southeastern part of the United States also. I don't know why they've skipped the southeastern part of Kansas for the last 15, 20 years, but apparently they're moving to cover that area again. So I've been getting calls about yield losses to Dectes. So, and the guys apparently are going to try and buy their seed early to have a little discount on their seed, which is a good idea in my opinion. So they're wanting to know if there's any resistant seed, any resistant variety that would be available for Dectes stem borer. And there's not. Well, what do we do to manage them since they're kind of new to our area? And that's not an easy question either. The stem borer will start coming out as an adult probably around 4th of July. That's usually maybe last of June, 1st of July. That's when we start looking for the adults. They'll spend a week or two aggregating or hanging out together and mating, and then the adults will spread out and start ovipositing in soybean fields or sunflower fields, but mainly soybean fields. So we have tried all kinds of different management techniques to help mitigate Dectes Stem Borer yield losses. And it's really difficult because the females are very mobile. So crop rotation doesn't help. If there's a field, if you rotate this field to the next field, you put it in soybeans, they're very mobile. They'll just fly over there and start laying eggs. They lay eggs from mid-July until, there's no more greenery on the soybeans till late August. So if you spray, and we put out insecticide trials, you can kill them, you can control them, but that insecticide's only going to last a couple of weeks. So then you got to do it again, and you have to do it again. So you end up doing it 3 or 4 or 5 times. It's just not economically feasible to control Dectes Stem Borers. And if the timing's not such, they lay those eggs right in the petio, and as soon as that egg hatches, that little larvae bores into the stem and feeds inside the stem, so no insecticide is going to penetrate that. So then eventually they bore into the stem. They'll feed their way all the way down to the base of the stem, and they are cannibalistic. So even though there's an egg in each petio, and they're working their way down towards the end or towards the base of the sunflower of the soybean plant, you only find one. And then this is usually towards the end of August, just prior to harvest. They will girdle around the inside of the soybean plant, and the plant will stand up. It doesn't fall down unless you get wind. So if you get wind, it will blow the plant over. The majority of the lodging comes from this, the girdling of the plant and the lodging because of wind. We have not been able to show large yield losses due to the tunneling in the upper part of the plant or in the stem. And they can do a pretty good number of boring out the inside of the stem, but still those plants are pretty resilient at making yield, making sure they put the nutrition in the seed. So most of the yield loss comes from the lodging. So the management tactic or strategy that we propose or we recommend right now is get out and look, in first part of August when you start seeing the dead petios on the plants, get out and see how much infestation you have in the field. Try and harvest the worst infested fields first before they fall down, before you have a windstorm. I know that's not much of a recommendation, but that's all there is right now. We spent several years looking for resistance, searching for resistance. There just isn't any resistance right now. There's maybe a little bit, but it's not commercially available. And I don't know if it will be. It won't be for a while. So the answer is there's no variety that I know of right now that's commercially available that is resistant to Dectes Stem Borer. So if you're interested, if you've had Dectes problems in the past, you might want to look for the variety that has the strongest stem strength, so that if plants are infested with the little borers, they'll go down and the stem maybe will stand up better than a variety that doesn't have as strong a stem strength as some of the others. So that's kind of it in a nutshell about the Dectes Stem Borer in soybeans. I don't know why this year. Last year, they seemed to be spreading into the southeast a little bit more, but this year I got calls from all over southeast Kansas, as far south as the border, actually. So I don't see them going away. I see this is going to be a perpetual problem, just like it has been for the rest of the state. So you kind of got to learn how to manage them rather than, there's no option that you can just spray and kill them all or protect your plants by a spray or by a late planting date or early planting date, just because of the biology of the adults when they're out laying eggs for 5 to 6 weeks or 8 weeks, depending upon the weather and the mobility they have. And the adults can lay a lot of eggs per female. So it is a tough problem. So you just need to get out and look early on in 1st of August when the petios start dying, see how bad the infestation is in the field, and hope you can harvest that field first before there's any windstorm causes any lodging. So that's kind of the problem right now with Dectes.
When farmers are looking at the different varieties, are there any other pests or things that you'd recommend they maybe take an extra look at when it comes to entomology?
Not with soybeans. There is, with corn, we have a lot of BT corn, and that's a really good point. When you're selecting your variety, change up a little bit on the BTs there's 4 or 5 different events, for corn borers, corn rootworms, all kinds of different things. So to help slow down and/or, I shouldn't say prevent resistance, because insects are going to become resistant. At least so far, all the ones we've developed any kind of insecticide against have become resistant. That's a great point. If you have corn, you're using corn year after year, please select varieties that have the BT event in different locations and for different pests, so that we can help slow down resistance. The corn earworm, we did a trial with the BT when it first came out. The first year, it worked great against corn earworms in the ear. The second year, third year, you couldn't tell the varieties that were supposed to be resistant from the untreated or the check as far as the size of the ear goes. So that's how fast. Now, corn earworms are a little quicker at developing resistance than corn rootworms or some of the others, because there's 4 or 5 generations a year, and they run into BT and cotton and all the other crops. But that's a very good point. Make sure if there's an insect you're worried about and you're buying cotton, corn, sorghum, anything. Sorghum's another one. There's some tolerance to sugarcane aphids in some of the sorghum varieties. So if you're worried about sugarcane aphids or some of the other aphids, you might want to select a variety that has some tolerance to that. If you do, don't use the same type of tolerance or the same type of resistance year after year. Switch it up. Use a different class or a different event so that we can slow down or mitigate insects developing resistance to it as much as possible.
Jeff, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
That was K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and I wanted to take the time to share one more presentation from K-State Swine Day. This one is from the keynote speaker who's based in China, Arkin Wu, as he shares about the swine industry in that country.
In terms of total pork supply per year, we're talking about 58 million metric tons of pork supplied in China, or a little over 700 million marketed pigs per year. To put that in perspective, that's about 4.5 times the size of total pork output of the U.S. So, sow inventory. Before ASF, Chinese sow inventory is sitting at that around 43 million sows. And here comes to 2018, you know, ASF arrives China. Within just about a year, 13 months was it, China lost 1/3 of the total sow inventory. 21 months was all it took Chinese to recover from the bottom of 30 million sows to the new peak of 45 million sows. How did it happen? A lot of the sows recovered here came from breeding of finishing gilts. Those low productive, but that's what you do when pig price is $2.20 per pound live weight. You just breed anything you can breed. And here comes to in 2021, all of a sudden the market was flooded with pigs. So pig price dropped by 2/3 within just a few months. Those are probably the darkest moment of the industry, even worse than ASF, because your cost of production is extremely high between those low productive sows. And remember, those years, feed price was record high. And then the industry, quickly dropped and called those non-productive sows and leading to this decrease in inventory. And then here we're sitting at, 40 million, arguably, that's the number that government reported. But the trend moving forward, I think, is really a steady decline moving forward. Why? Chinese demand is not going to get any higher. Also, productivity is going to continue to improve. Less sows is needed. So there is forecast in saying, well, in the next 10 to 15 years or so, Chinese total sow inventory is going to drop to maybe closer to that 30 million is probably all we need. That's fast enough. If you think about it, it's almost 1 million sows per year. The structure of the industry, before 2010, I would say 90% of the sows in China are in those small-scale production. The scalation really started to take shape, starting 2010 and increase slowly until 2018 when ASF, is really the game changer. Small farms, they took the biggest hit, during ASF, and quickly shrunk. And that gives the medium-sized and large-sized producers, an opportunity to grow at a really fast pace. What happened to the small farms, right? A lot of them, they just don't have the infrastructure and the discipline and biosecurity property to raise pigs under the ASF pressure. So they either had to go out of business or they had to improve or upgrade their facility and became contract finishing farmers for the large companies. Here the graph shows a portion of the large enterprises, they are trying to own their finishing space, but most of the large enterprises, they depend heavily on contract finishing model. The productivity as an industry is steadily improving. Looking at farrow-to-finish mortality, you used to push in at 20% during the ASF. Now, not the best, but much better at 12, arguably 13%, and as an industry average. PSY, during the years of 2019 and 2020, we're down to 17, 18 maybe, or not even that. And then today, almost 1 pig improvement per year, and we're sitting at 21 to 22 as an industry average. But if you look at the really scaled farms in China, we're talking about Muyuan, the Wins, their performance are standing out. I remember the days when Riverstone Farms, we were able to achieve 30 PSY. We were the rock stars, right? It really hit the curve. Today, we're seeing more and more systems are pushing that level. Muyuan is a good example. It's a kind of a mystery company to a lot of us. It reported their PSY at 26 in the year of 2024, last year. Year to date, they're reporting 28. Even though I still question about how they calculate that number, but percentage of improvement, I think is very real. I don't agree with everything they do, but you almost have to admire this company for two things: implementation and innovation. They're running a very young team and a very special HR system that allow them to get the team very motivated, work very hard in the farm. Innovation. They're very big at, developing the technologies that works for them, the seasonal air filtration as an example. So I always kind of pushing our team in China or telling our colleagues in the U.S., we need to keep advancing our technology, keep our eyes open because, these guys are catching up quick. Cost of production, the cost disadvantage of Chinese raising pigs compared to many other countries in the world, that's just a reality, and that needle is hard to move. Part of that is, grain cost, corn is expensive. That's a fact. Others are disease. Even though we're having a better handle on ASF now, but PRRS is probably a bigger problem today. And, feed efficiency as an industry are still behind, I would say. That's between disease and inconsistent quality of genetics. And so there's a lot of effort is going into these areas, I think, which is leading to a boom of technology in the pig farming world in China. From automation, digitalization, and AI, a lot of focus on precise calling, precise nutrition. The camera technology is very mature now. See this robot they have with camera and all kind of sensors on the rail on top of the pens. They're capturing real-time weight estimation, the sounds, the environmental data. And they're one of the system that, first adopted the two-ration blending feeding for, their finishing. So they're trying to meet their nutrient requirement curve on a daily basis. At least that's what they claim. Smart ventilation control. You look at, this air tunnel and these small air outlets. They're trying to ventilate to the target animal more precisely with an effort to, decrease total CFM needed per barn. And AI I think it's around the corner. There's a lot of discussion on early disease diagnosis and, more precise individual treatments without whole herd treatments. With, these companies, their size, their volume, they can, make a lot of things happen quickly. And the industry as a whole, I think, is taking advantage, spillover effect of the overcapacity of manufacturing capacity in China, right? So having the access to more advanced technology is getting cheaper and easier. I'm sure you're curious about the multi-story farms. I've been to a couple of them. It's really a product of, I think, extreme profitability and reckless expansion during the years of, severe ASF. Among the farms that I've been to, I've seen probably there's one or two projects are arguably successful, but majority are total failure. Yes, it is more efficient use of land, and some argue maybe it's a better biosecurity design because with having all this production at one place, they are trying to, decrease or having minimum amount of external transportation and introduction of, feed or any supply or animal. But the disadvantage is apparent, right? Cost. Cost of production is about twice as high as the traditional farms. A lot of the farms are just poorly designed with ventilation. And, a lot of the constructions are just poor quality. Water leaking as a major problem. And the biggest challenge, though, goes back to disease management with the one-side production. And guess what? The biggest problem, though, environmental pressure. The odor control. A lot of these projects are close to the metropolitan area. The complaints were filed on a daily basis. And because of this single reason, I know many projects were either shut down or operate at a half capacity.
Once again, that was the keynote speaker from K-State Swine Day, Arkin Wu. If you'd like to hear his full presentation, you can do so by navigating to it through ksuswine.org. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. If you're caring for a Christmas cactus, poinsettia, or an amaryllis, K-State instructor and horticulture extension specialist Cynthia Domenghini says that water, light, and temperature are all important factors. Cynthia, the holidays are getting closer and closer, and as part of that, a lot of houseplants as well. We think primarily of three, the Christmas cactus, poinsettias, and the amaryllis. Let's talk a little bit about the plant care for each of those, starting with maybe the Christmas cactus and the poinsettias.
The Christmas cactus and poinsettia prefer indoor daytime temperatures in a range from all the way down to 60 degrees up to 80 degrees even. And the nighttime temperatures, it's fine for it to cool off even a little bit by maybe 55 to 65 degrees during that nighttime temperature. And just like with any other houseplant, only give it water when it needs it. And there's a couple things you can do. The first one is stick your finger in the soil. If the soil is dry up to your first knuckle, give it some water. The other way is to lift the pot up. And if it feels lightweight, give it some water. Now, when you give it water, though, the way I handle this is I put the plant in the sink and I water it in the sink until the water drains out the bottom. Often, poinsettias especially will come in a foil wrap, and that's going to trap all of the water, and you don't want the pot sitting in water. So take that foil wrap off. If the pot is sitting in a saucer, take it out of that saucer. Let the water drain out of the bottom of the container in the sink. And when it's done draining, then you can put it back in the foil wrap or in the saucer.
That's one of the most common mistakes, isn't it? Is probably overwatering our houseplants.
Exactly. We love our plants too much and we give them too much water. It drowns the roots. There's not enough air in the soil, and eventually the roots will rot and the plant will die.
Does location matter at all? I know a lot of times these end up on a dining room table.
Ideally, they would be getting some sunlight. The plants are getting their energy from that sunlight or artificial lighting if you have that available. Those are two options. But at the same time, too much sunlight will cause the blooms to end prematurely. So finding that balance of how much light to give your plant is important.
In terms of the Christmas cactus, is there anything different there than from the poinsettias?
Well, really both. The Christmas cactus and the poinsettia, they can be grown year-round. It's not as common to grow the poinsettias. Typically, people grow them through the Christmas season or the holiday season, and then they compost them once they're not looking so nice indoors. The Christmas cactus is more commonly grown year-round. So if you're going to continue growing that, you can actually move it outdoors once the danger of frost has passed. Keep it in an area that still receives shade, and then you can move it into an area where it receives more sunlight, up to about 6 hours of sunlight a day. But it also needs to stay in a container where it's actually slightly root bound, which is not typical for houseplants. Our traditional houseplants, we don't really want them to be root bound, but Christmas cactus actually prefer that tighter space where the roots are starting to push up against that container.
In terms of the amaryllis, what should we be thinking about there?
So the amaryllis is an interesting plant where you notice significant upright growth in that stem over a pretty short period of time. It's happening right now. If you're growing one in your home, you're watching that amaryllis grow a couple inches, within a week or so. Right now, before they go into bloom, it's great to keep it in a sunny window, or again, if you have artificial lighting available. But if you are growing it in a window, you want to make sure to turn that container every few days or so, and that'll keep the stem growing up rather than growing towards that light source, and then you would end up with a crooked stem that you would have to support with some kind of staking. Once it does start to bloom, then you can move it away from that light source, and that's going to help the blooms last longer. Some people are really anxious about caring for some of these that look like they're more exotic, but if you're providing those basic needs, water as needed, not on a regular schedule, just as the plant tells you it needs it, and provide it that light source, you're going to do all right.
That's Cynthia Domenghini, a K-State instructor and horticulture extension specialist with information on caring for holiday plants. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.